Pakistan, and I feel very few startups are targeting that. And a lot of problems associated with that space. So that's something which we're very keen on, along with fintech, which is another big sector, which has a lot of opportunities and a lot of problems in Pakistan which can be solved.
Thank you, Umar. Somehow it appears that you've cracked the code on how to move to Saudi, so maybe you can share your insights.
No, it's still too early to say that, but look, as a founder, we need to ask ourselves, why do we want to move out of Pakistan or expand into another market? We started this to solve a problem. So have we solved that problem yet? If we have been able to solve that problem, and if we're leading the market and we have the right teams in place, it only makes sense to expand into another market, because your ambitions should be beyond one market. But if you're just going to another market because you'll be able to raise capital there, then capital should not be the reason why you make those decisions, because then you're not aligned with your mission, which is to solve problems, why you started in the first place. So you need to be true to yourself and to the mission that we need to solve this problem. We need to solve this problem in Pakistan, because that's where we started. There was a reason why we started in Pakistan, because that's our country. And just because there is more capital somewhere else is not going to drive our mission or drive us into another market. We want to solve problems. We want to be a Pakistani startup that is solving problems regionally and inshallah globally as well. But it needs to start with Pakistan.
Perfect, thank you. I will end with Rabil. Rabil, are you there? Can you hear us? I can't see you, so I just want to make sure that you're still here. He's disconnected. Well, thank you so much. This was a... Oh no, Rabil is here. Rabil, final comments, please. You're mute, I think. Nope, we can't hear you.
Testing.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I just wanted to say that it's very easy to go down the spiral of thinking that everything is bad, the news cycle doesn't help in Pakistan. But where we are standing right now, a lot of that tough environment is also behind us. So we do need to look at still what the long-term thesis is, and the opportunity to create and build in Pakistan still very much exists. While we're talking about certain challenges around talent, a vast majority of that talent still is looking for opportunities within the country as well. And while we can point to some examples of effective expansion beyond Pakistan, we need to stay true to what that thesis was, which got us started, and where some of the phenomenal founders that we have in the country have continued to show resilience and grit and build. Yeah. So we should, again, focus on those things as well. There's a lot of opportunity. We should be smarter now because of the experiences we've had. We should help channel those investments in the right places and use them more effectively. But we can't really give up at this stage, because a lot of the hard work has been done. And I think the opportunity and the upside from here on is clearly there. So that's really my what I would want the takeaway to be, so people to not get disappointed, but just approach things with an open mind.
Thank you. I'm sure it's safe to say on behalf of everybody that we could carry on this conversation a little longer as well. This is quite enlightening for everybody, especially for me. And I think special kudos is due to SECP for organizing this event, getting all of this intellectual brain power here on this panel today. It's been a joy. Thank you, everybody, and thank you again, SECP and the organizers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ahmed Uzair, and our esteemed panelists for this wonderful discussion. And it's absolutely correct that this is something that we look forward to and that we are optimistic about. And this positivity is extremely important. We heard that initially in the beginning of today's session from our entrepreneurs and their journeys as well. And now, of course, from people who are very deeply involved in the entire process of supporting startups and providing their conducive environment. It's It's absolutely essential to hear this from them as well. And as Ms. Bess said earlier, as part of the panel discussion, it's important to making sure that we're going to move ahead with this discussion to working groups, to tangible actions, to papers, to steps that we can take that actually enable the decision makers and policy makers to take that leap forward and support the ecosystem in Pakistan. And so the Pakistan Startup Summit 2024 is just the beginning. It will lead to all of these directions that we are setting today with our very valuable experts. Ladies and gentlemen, building on the conducive environment that we've just discussed, we're going to move on to our next panel session, which also focuses on capital markets, funding, and easing business regulations, with a focus on how to have these strategic reforms in making sure that the process of doing business in Pakistan is easier for startups. They will also be exploring how capital markets can serve as a key resource for startups, and in addition to that, how policymakers and key stakeholders can contribute to this discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, this panel session will be moderated by Mr. Asif Ali Qureshi, who's CEO UBL Funds and has over 25 years of experience in the financial sector, ranging from economic and financial research to investment banking to consulting, training, and entrepreneurship. He is also somebody who's co-founded 2 stock brokerage companies and an online financial database portal. His key areas are focused for analytical work, which include economy, financial inclusion, and energy. He also served as a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council in the year 2021 and has consulted for the ADB, the World Bank, and FCDO. He's also a member of the Capital Market Advisory Council of the Ministry of Finance and various committees established by the SECP and the Ministry of Finance. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Asif Ali Qureshi, who will then be introducing our panelists for this session.
Thank you very much. Considering that we are already way behind schedule, there was a very long introduction about me. My apologies for that. In the interest of time, I'm just going to invite all the esteemed panelists to the stage, starting with Mr. Nadeem Naqvi. Naqvi Saab has more than 40 years of experience in the financial sector, both in Pakistan and abroad. He's currently the acting CEO of Pakistan Stock Exchange. Next, I would like to invite Ms. Amara Masood. She is currently the Global Industries GM for Banking and Financial Services and Systems Limited, and the CEO of NDC Tech. She has over 29 years of experience in IT and governance. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Badiuddin Akbar, who's the CEO of CDC, the Central Depository Company of Pakistan. He has over 20 years of experience in the financial sector. He's also serving on the board of IT Minds, which is a subsidiary of CDC, and provides BPO services for asset management companies and fund managers. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Shahid Ali Habib, who is the CEO of Arif Habib Limited, a leading corporate brokerage house and investment banking outfit. He has more than 25 years experience in the financial sector. Last but not least, I would like to invite Mr. Khaldoon bin Latif, who is the CEO of Al-Falah Investments, which is one of the leading asset management companies in the country. Right. I think it's useful to gain some perspective on where things stand as we discuss this important topic of what capital markets can do in stimulating startup growth in the country. I was looking at the data, and you really need either a magnifying glass or a microscope to actually find the figures for startup funding from domestic sources that we have in this country. The total figure size that I was able to get from SECP report was about 8.4 billion in total assets of pension, of private equity funds and venture capitals. That's about less than 0.01% of GDP. The number is not very small, but it's also has actually been shrinking over the last couple of years. The total market capitalization of the stocks, the only 5 stocks listed on Stock Exchange GEM board, the Growth Enterprise Market Board, is about 8.2 billion rupees, and 50% of that is actually comprised by one company, which I don't know whether it fits the definition of a startup or not. It's actually a coal-based power plant. So given the size of these, the formal funding which is available for domestic sources to startups, obviously, we have not been doing our job. So I'm going to start with Naqvi sir. Sir, obviously, these figures are not very encouraging. So I would like to ask you what has gone wrong and what can be done to fix it?
Thank you, Arif. Assalamu alaikum. I think one of the key things when we talk about the startup culture, the startup ecosystem, is the absence of the biggest player. It is, first of all, I think one should thank SECP to have initiated this thing, and Khalda Saiba and Rai Saab, thank you so much for actually formalizing discussions on this. But where is the government? The amount of funding today that is required to kickstart any kind of initiative in the startup, specifically tech startup, to allow it to test, fail, and again, test again and succeed and scale up requires tremendous amount of funding. As in the Sherlock Holmes story, Hounds of Baskerville, he asks his number 2, Dr. Watson. Dr. Watson said, "But Holmes, the dog did not bark." And Holmes said, "Exactly, Watson, that is the heart of the matter. The dog did not bark." And my question is, the government is invisible. Where is the government? Where is the macro level policy? Mr. Modi, when he came to power, put up, by some reports, a 200 billion rupee funding for the startup universe. Israel, in 1990, put up $100 billion funding, matching private equity with government subsidy to get Israel up to the startup point. Where is our government? Where is it where the money is going to start coming from? Because you see, the key element, whether it is the stock exchanges or other capital market players like the asset management companies, they can only do so much. I have been a regulator all my life, but there was a time when, thanks to Mr. AKD, we started the first TMT, which is the first technology venture fund in Pakistan, and he, being an entrepreneur, put in 300 million rupees 15, 20 years ago. And that was it. No one else came forward until now when some funds have started to coming in. You need risk takers, but risk takers themselves cannot really make the needle move. Just for record purposes, we invested in 7 companies, all startups, and I was chairman of TMT. 3 went dud, 4 were reasonably successful, and 2 were good enough and successful enough to be sold to the trade with an IRR over a 6-year period of more than 45%. Now, that is the kind of return that investor gets for the whole fund. With that kind of a return possible, people are always interested in finding new ways and new companies who can innovate, who can solve problems, and then scale up to create a commercially viable entity. But that was one-off. If we are going to compete today, where startup is a big thing, all countries are focused on it, we will need the government to come in. Couple of things that the government can do, Arif. One is there should be a tax pass-through for investors who invest in the startup. They should be allowed to take the losses and then equate those losses for profits made, just like capital gains tax. Secondly, there has to be a way whereby the startups funding is matched by a master federal level fund who can support the startup in the initial years. Third, when a startup goes into the capital market to raise funds from the public, you are asking an average person to take risk. SECP has already gone one step in this direction of creating the GEM board and a set of eligible investors up to 200 million rupees. However, we see that people are not coming forward because those entities' shares cannot be traded at the moment. We are working with SECP to raise the limit to ₹1 billion, because in today's world, ₹1 billion is what? Not even $3 million. So you need people who can come in, and there are international investors. If you remember, you and I were talking about the expatriate Pakistanis, the NRPs, who are very interested in supporting something, but they need a platform. So I think the capital markets are a place which can give credibility. This now comes to us, to Badi, myself, NCCPL. We need to up our capacity in order to analyze and understand what the startup mindset is, what kind of risks startup take, and be able to communicate with the average Joe, with a more sophisticated investor, what the risks are and what the potential return is. I think communication is another missing factor other than the government itself. So I will not talk too much in detail at this point in time, except saying we need to have the government start the process, come into the picture. As you very rightly said, as a percent of GDP, it's zero, effectively. At least get it to 0.5% of GDP with the government budget coming up next year, and then house that funding with a group of industry-savvy, experienced private equity players, fund managers, and regulators, so there is a credibility of trustees of that fund who have knowledge, whose personal integrity is there, and there's no nepotism and the typical mindset that goes with government entities of favoritism coming in. Those people should be independent trustees. They should be able to evaluate where the money ought to go, and then the capital markets come in, and jointly they come together with private equity people, with venture capital funds, as a multitude of investors, not one, but different types, and then support the ecosystem in that way.
Thank you, Nadeem Sab. Mr. Mara, if I could come to you with a question. The panel before us, they talked a lot about other issues who are impacting the growth of startups in the country, especially the talent part. I'd like to ask you a slightly different question, and that is whether the local corporates, especially the banking sector, is that also contributing towards stymieing the growth of startups in the country? Because they always prefer, they're by far the largest spenders on IT in the country as a sector, but they always have a preference for foreign vendors. So do you think that is sort of a hindrance which is being created, an obstacle which is being created by a non-supportive role of the corporate sector or the other government organizations by preferring the foreign vendors over the local ones?
Yes, I mean, your question pertains to how the local vendors can compete with international vendors in this ecosystem. So I think the most important thing, because you're referring to the banking sector is very heavily regulated, and there is a factor of finding trustworthy brands, to run the bank. So one of the things, that has happened over time is that local vendors have come in and competed with international vendors, which is a great thing, because there is a lot of learning that can take place in the local market where they can improve the product and they can learn from the international competition what is there. But I think the few things which are a hindrance to local companies, competing heavily in this market is, one is that, they are very focused on only catering to the local requirements and not to the global regulations which are mandated in industries like, banking or telecommunications, where, now there is so much of, FATCA and FATF and all these regulations which, IFRS 9, all these regulations which basically you need to comply to. So one of the advices that I would give, to companies which are trying to compete in the local ecosystem is that they should find small niches rather than spread themselves out too much. Find the niches where they can do the best. For instance, they would have definitely an edge to know about the local requirements of a bank, and they can build solutions, faster and compete heavily with the international brands to provide that kind of services. I think the other thing which I also feel is that the market awareness is not there. So their access to grow out of the country becomes a bottleneck for them. And that always boils down to the expertise which is available because of the limited funding that they have. They do not have usually people who have access or knowledge about both regional markets as well as global markets as well. So bringing that expertise into those companies to compete in the international markets is very important for them.
Thank you very much. Badisa, if I could ask you about the journey of IT Mind as a subsidiary of CDC. Can you briefly describe the journey over time, how it has come, what sort of challenges it's faced, and given its current position in the industry, do you think there is anything more that IT Minds can do, maybe serve as an incubator or in some forms support the startups in the country?
Thank you, Asif. Actually, IT Mind, it's a wholly owned subsidiary of CDC, which we have started its operation back in 2009 by providing some IT services, and we will be partnered with Microsoft and IBM, and we provided IT management services locally and internationally, basically in the Middle East and African market. And then we have provided about more than 7 years the shared registrar system to Ghana, which providing complete end-to-end system support and by making some customized changes as required by the Ghana repository and the clearing company. And after 2009, then we have evolving, there are some challenges, the challenges that discussed in the previous panels as well, which is the retaining of the talent, and then funding requirement as well. And then we have moved towards by providing the BPO services to the mutual fund industry. So right now, after providing about 7 or 8 years to the IT management services, being partnered with IBM and Microsoft, then we have developed in-house robust software, which is a back office accounting system, by providing end-to-end operational support to the mutual fund industry, and it has been extended to other companies as well. So presently, we are providing the BPO services to the different companies, and then these BPO services are equally available to some startups as well. So we are engaged with some startups. We are providing complete back office service solution to various startups who are working with us. And we also providing some support to the startup who was involved in tokenization of asset. We are providing complete end-to-end system integration. We are providing and also providing the clearing and settlement services to those startups for providing the tokenization of asset by buying and selling on their respective platform. As you said about the future of IT Mind, and there is a chance to become the incubator. So right now, as such, there is no near future plan for such thing. But we are working on different strategy to move again IT Mind from BPO services to provide the IT services to the industry as well. So we are working in a different strategy to provide support to startup with reference to provide the IT support, because at the back of the IT Mind is the CDC, which has a robust IT infrastructure, and we are able to provide to leveraging out our IT and operational infrastructure to support the various startups. As we are doing currently engaged with various startups by providing certain supports, by end-to-end system integration, by providing IT setups as well. So yes, CDC is working behind the IT Mind, and IT Mind is providing support to startups as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Badisa. Shahid, if I could come to you. We all face a problem in the capital markets of very limited supply of risk capital in the country. And they're just not limited to startups. In fact, the situation is used to be even worse for the listed equities. People would not even buy stocks at 20% dividend yield. So what to talk about investing in a far riskier product. So what do you think is essentially fundamentally wrong with our mindset that we are not willing to take any risk? We just want to either invest in government securities or we prefer investing in guaranteed return projects and don't look at projects which entail any kind of risk. And what can be done to actually change that mindset?
Yeah, very, very pertinent question, Asif. I think the investors who are investing in the equity market have a different lens, actually, and we need an altogether different lens for investing in the startup. And we don't know anything about the startup. The investors don't know anything. I think we have to. I think this all happens initially, but I think we have to. The good thing is that all the investors are available in the capital market, whether it's institutional investors, banks, mutual funds, insurance companies, pension funds, they all are available. And if I compare that, out of $42 billion of market capitalization, if I take the free float, which is $12 billion, out of $12 billion, $3.5 to $4 billion is owned by the institutional investors. I think institutional investors have to take the lead, and they have to actually, all the venture funds or the private equity funds should go to these institutional investors. I think globally, 1 to 2% of asset under management goes to startup funding, and it doesn't happen in Pakistan. I think, in my view, bank has to take the lead because they are having a good investment size, around 30 trillion of investment, and their profit for 1 year, for the last 12 months, is around 600 billion. So even if they take into account 2% of their profit and deploy that fund for the venture fund or the private equity fund, who knows the business of investing in the startup, rather than going directly, like it happens, like the institutional investors, the insurance companies, many go to the mutual fund to invest in the equities. So I mean, these institutional investors, whether insurance or the banks, should fund venture fund and the private equity fund to take this route to invest in the startup. And this is how I think, this journey can flourish. And I think once the best performing companies, if those best performing companies, we can bring those companies in the GEM board, and the GEM board investors then appreciate those companies where they know that the anchor investors have already taken the risk. Anchor investors actually, have invested in those companies, and they then, even if you don't rely on the accredited investors, even the public investors will also invest in those equities where they see that it is underwritten or it is very much invested by the institutional investors. So I think you are very much right that we all the time we consider the price earning multiple and the dividend yield, and it is always so attractive in Pakistani market, and with the high interest rate environment. One other thing is the high interest rate environment. I mean, you can't see startup market to flourish in the interest rate environment of 22%. Definitely, if the current interest rate environment of 12 to 13% will definitely kick off this market, and I think some funding from the institutional investors can go to the venture fund. They can invest in the startup companies, and that come to the capital market. I think this is the route, I think, where we can flourish the capital market. We can have good startup companies with the third or fourth round, they can come in the capital market.
Thank you, Shahid. Just want to share a point. When I joined capital markets back in year 2000, I was told that point in time when I was just an analyst that, this was the last year when fertilizer sector would be making a lot of money because the subsidy on gas is going to go away, and the profitability of the sector will actually plummet. And over the last 25 years, fertilizer, which is supposedly one of the least riskiest sectors, has actually delivered a return of more than 22% a year in terms of total return on stock exchange. So that goes to show that, when you have these kind of returns on relatively risky sectors or, businesses where the perceived risk of business is very low, and you drawing that kind of returns, it's very difficult to convince an average institutional investor to look at even riskier ideas and invest in those businesses.
Asif, let me give you one more example, one more interesting example. You know, one of the largest conglomerate of this country, let's say Lucky Group, you know, when I see the numbers, the last year profitability growth, CAGR was over 40%. The return on equity is 20%. Still, they are trading at 5 to 6 times price earning multiples. You know, when these kind of companies, which are so growing and which are the biggest companies, if they are trading at so low multiple, you know, so you know why, how come investors can go to startup directly? I mean, they can only go through the venture fund or the private equity fund who has a different lens, actually.
Banking sector is by far the most profitable sector in the country. I think last year's pre-tax profitability was about 1.3 trillion rupees. So Khaldun, my question to you would be, do you think that there should be any regulatory requirement or some sort of encouragement from the regulator to maybe allocate 1 or 2% of their pre-tax profitability towards a startup fund to encourage investment in these kind of companies in the country?
So I think what you've rightfully, Shahid also pointed out, the earnings of the banking sector is quite high. And I represent an institution, frankly, who's quite committed to the economic growth, and without even the regulatory leg of it, they themselves are looking at exploring these opportunities. And we as an entity we've set up this whole operation for private equity and REIT to fundamentally capture this opportunity, and not just limiting it to the bank's excess capital and returns, but also the wider market. And I think one of the key things I would like to highlight is it's important to time certain sort of investments. All economies operate in a business cycle, and within that business cycle, there are certain opportunities that become attractive at certain times and others at other times within the cycle. So having said that, looking at what has happened in Pakistan over the last few years, clearly the multiples that we are seeing in the market is a function of our macroeconomic challenges, which we have just overcome. And like Shahid pointed out, as we have excess liquidity with falling interest rate, excess liquidity will reprice itself and re-channelize to equities. The pricing regime within these markets will also change. So within expectations, we have seen the bottoms at 2 times price to earning multiples. We're already at 4 within the last 6 to 12 months. And looking at how the interest rate trajectory looks, we're likely to head towards 5 to 6 times price to earning multiples. Once the multiples are achieved, and we've highlighted, like you've just stated, that there are sectors which have very low risk and they offer very high return. The low-risk capital that is currently residing within the fixed income component will go and do the price discovery here. Once those valuations are exhausted, the same capital is going to search for alternative assets with the right balance of risk. And they will be re-channelized into private, hopefully, venture capital as well. And frankly, that's the role that we have identified for ourselves, and we have started our private equity venture. Because we feel once this price discovery cycle is completed, we will be able to attract the capital which will be suited for these kind of investments. So we've closed one of our private equity fund with the support of our bank and our investors, trying to time it in a way that more of these can be rapidly coming calendar year. So we can clearly see an ecosystem developing. Yes, panelists who came here and spoke how in the previous cycle, unfortunately, our economy acted adversely than the expectations of entrepreneurs who came and set up businesses. However, they've learned some of those lessons. They will now their business models, they would have strengthened themselves. And institutions like ourselves who are trying to raise capital at the right valuation will re-channelize them to these opportunities. Of course, there are some challenges on those opportunities, as something that Nadeem highlighted earlier. On the taxation side, there are some adjustments that would be required to aggregate greater capital. We're also seeing a lot of larger listed players who are willing to participate in this space and draw in other corporates to aggregate and distribute the risk. So we can clearly see the ecosystem is still at an early stage, but there is a lot of intent and desire across the board, not just the banks, but other corporate players to come and participate and then hopefully lead to the growth engine of this country.
Thank Thank you, Khaldun. I'm going to ask one question to all the panelists. In the interest of time, we'll make sure that this is the question that I asked one. And that what 2 or 3 suggestions would you make to the government or to the authorities in terms of regulatory reforms or that you will help enable or unleash the growth potential of startups in Pakistan? Nadeem sir, starting with you, sir.
I think there are a very large number of reforms that would be required, but I think you're going to limit yourself to some key reforms. I think one would be to provide incentives to funds, whether it is, as Khaldun very rightly said, a kind of aggregation of different institutions, be banks, be it asset management companies, be it large corporates who have experience in their own areas and therefore can help in identifying niches. And I'll just digress a little. For example, Pakistan has been a country of importers. Manufacturing really hasn't been our forte. But as a country of importers, one of the biggest areas is the retail outlets. Now, there are tremendous opportunities in digitizing, automating, and delivering retail products. Now, if people like Lever Brothers, Nestle, perhaps some of the funds, including, let's say, Khaldun's fund, and some banks get together to put together a very specific fund for IT-related improvements in the entire retail value-added chain. Now, that's a very tangible, real thing that can be done, and its size can be very easily discerned given the overall place it has in the economy. Similarly, I think the government, while very rightly pushing banks in terms of the taxation side, that if you do not, if you invest more than X% in government securities, you will be taxed extra. Now, if a very small portion of that is said, rather than just tax extra, but if maybe 0.5% of that is put into funds that go into startup or IT-related startup, we will then allow you to take that as a tax benefit. Now, that will be within the IMF framework. It will not be special subsidy. It will be simply change of focus. But this requires a lot of discussion with the industry itself, because over a 5-year, 10-year period, banks' credit departments will develop the skills and the capacity necessary to understand the startup risks. And this is not SME financing, which is a very different ballgame. This is a conceptual, the whole chain is from concept to development to go-to-market. And at that point in time, the other seed capital can start coming in. So these are some of the areas which, because of the shortage of time, but there's a whole area. The other part I would like to say is that a think tank of these institutions can be developed. What are the global mega trends? Where does Pakistan fit in those global mega trends? We have discussed in the previous panel AI, but there are many other significant global mega trends happening. For example, in the area of sustainable energy. We talk a lot about sustainable energy, but has anyone given a thought that the real hard work in sustainable energy is the engineering part of it? Are there startups who are focusing with international JV or themselves on creating sustainable energy mechanics or the actual instruments that will allow solar capture, that will allow battery storage to increase? Now, these are all global trends, and they're not going to be limited to Pakistan. You get it right, you can make it global. The other part is the global demographics. Population all over the world in the developed countries is aging rapidly. What are the services sitting in Pakistan that can be delivered to those areas through the startups, supported by a strong financial backing by the funds, as well as joint ventures with those countries' specialists? So these are some examples where one can talk a lot and discuss in detail of where the opportunities lie.
Thank you, sir. Madam Mana, if I could ask you the same question, what 2 or 3 suggestions for reforms would you suggest to the government?
Yeah, so I think, if we, just carrying on from the conversation, what Nadeem Saab was saying, there are 2 or 3 things that we need to help ourselves with. When we look at the global trends, there are some very easy things that we could promote within the startup culture. One of them, of course, is on the AI side, but the other is how do we make our software companies make their products available on SaaS? Because, that should be something which basically makes their product available globally to a very large, and we should be able to export a lot more. And then, of course, again, bringing in the right talent to grow this kind of a market requires incubators, requires accelerators, and there are some in Pakistan which are, doing very well, but at a very, very small scale. So I think we need to help in that area as well, where we give some importance to making these incubators and accelerators fund more so that they can provide resources for IT companies, as an example, to build products, to host them on public clouds, on hyperscalers, and to be able to do marketing and export of these products in a larger scale manner. So I think these are primarily what be some of the basic things. That, of course, on the regulation and compliance side, making single window to for startups to be able to not only register themselves as companies, but also take care of the taxation, take care of the regulatory compliances that they have to do on a regular basis, and provide those type of portals within the country, which, CDC is also helping in many ways. And of course, SECP is also doing a lot of things in that area. But I think we need to do much more to be able to make businesses to ease of business.
But is that same question to you?
Yes, yet regulatory reform is indeed critical for startup, not only for startup, it is equally critical for all type of businesses as well. First and foremost is the requirement to streamlining the process to start a business, whereby to reduce the number of procedures, time and cost involved, along with to bring transparency in the regulatory requirements so that entrepreneurs can easily understand the business laws and to comply with accordingly. Recently, SECP under its LEAP program has introduced an online registration of their companies. However, it required to be extended as it has been implemented in the neighboring country. As Mara said, there is a one-stop shop solution, one-window solution for the company registration, for getting licenses from different authorities, to get certification, and even they can apply for the intellectual property rights and patents as well. So there is a one-stop shop solution should be available for the startup so that they do not need to go here and there for the different regulatory authorities and bodies as well. Apart from that, there is also a concept in the neighboring country, they have started the self-reliance certification from the different regulatory requirements, whereby the enterprise should not go to should not undergone through various audits and surveys in the initial years, so that they can more focus on their core activities. When we talk about the regulatory reform, there is a tax reform which has already been talked too much these days. I understand there are some tax incentives that are available for the startup. Those type of incentives are all extended to all type of startup by giving incentives or even a tax holidays for at least 2 to 5 years so that they can reinvest their profit in their business so that they can grow much faster. And in the neighboring country, they have also started to simplifying the tax filing requirements so that the startup should not get involved by hiring the tax consultant, which is cost to the startup. So these are some steps by streamlining, the making transparency, making one-window solution, making them some tax holidays. It will definitely give benefit to startups so that they can focus more on their core activities and to grow their business accordingly.
थैंक यू वरी साहब शायद आपसे एक बड़ी कॉन्क्रीट मुझे कुछ नंबर्स चाहिए 100 बिलियन रुपए का स्टार्टअप फंड कब बना लेंगे आप
सॉरी
100 बिलियन रुपीस का स्टार्टअप फंड कब तक बना लेंगे आप
इंशाल्लाह मतलब अगर इंटरेस्ट रेट इन्वायरमेंट इसी तरीके से नीचे जाता गया तो इंशाल्लाह मुझे लगता है कि बहुत जल्दी इसकी इसमें पेशरफ्त होगी I think the first and foremost step the government should take is to give tax incentive, which is very important for the big institutional investors. The banks are paying 49% tax rate, so if they are allowed actually to invest in a startup, in a venture fund or a private equity fund, and they should be allowed to have very small taxation, then I think they will definitely go and actually invest in the venture fund or the private equity fund, which ultimately will go to the for the startup financing. And I think they should also be allowed to adjust losses against other capital gains as well. I think the government should also encourage other institutions to provide learning, training about the startup to general big investors, the investors which are actually going into mergers and acquisitions, which are, investing in the equities market, in the debt market. They should be given knowledge about the startup, where they should also be given knowledge about the international success story. We don't know about the international success stories, and I think कोई एक अगर success story हो गई ना, तो मेरा ख्याल से everybody will come. I think all the investors will line up if we see any success stories in Pakistan. So we are waiting for the success story. I think इसके अलावा जिस तरह पाकिस्तान mortgage refinancing company है ना, I think इसी तरीके से there should be, the government should encourage, pursue the large institutional investors to make a company such like that, so that, everybody subscribe some portion of their investment to that company, and that company will then, provide funding for the startup. I think that will create the ecosystem, that will create activity, and ultimately then those institutional investors or the high net worth individuals who will invest in that company, if they see the performance, of the individual startup companies, they will then they will also then come, themselves. They will come separately as well. They will co-invest separately. So they can be mergers and acquisitions as well through that course. I think this is the way I think, we should move forward.
Khaldun, final thoughts from your side?
So first of all, I think the ecosystem, particularly on the regulatory side, there is a lot of work that has been done. Unfortunately, it is just stuck behind a bottleneck of taxation. The moment we resolve this, there's a fairly sizable ecosystem that I can already foresee in the form of guarantee companies that are already operating. So within this ecosystem of startups, the early phase requires a certain amount of venture debt, which is so far not participating because we cannot create. However, there are institutions who can ring fence and create guarantee structures that can allow and grow this. At the same time, from an aggregation point of view, if the funds are there with the adequate or the right alignment of interest in the form of tax, it can then align both of these things and give an acceleration to the entire startup ecosystem. At the same time, I would also like to highlight, I think the regulatory regime then also allows us to create fairly strong corporate governances for the existing startup players who have gone through now 2 cycles of creation. The combination of these 2 things, particularly because of our parents' understanding of how risk frameworks should operate, it can de-risk a number of business models which have not performed very well in our opinion. But if they had the right institutional partner with them, they would have geared up. We could have given them the access not just to capital, but also expertise and execution capability, which is so far missing. We are seeing a lot of foreign players participating who don't fully understand our local regimes, have not been able to address this space. We as those local institutions who have far better understanding of the regime can then create that value. However, I think the bottleneck of having a large-scale effect, right now taxation is the only key element which I feel requires urgent addressing.
Thank you, Khuldoon. With that, I would like to close this panel discussion with a vote of thanks to all the participants. Thank you very much. I wish we had more time. Thank you, Nadeem Saab. Thank you, Ms. Amara. Thank you, Badi Saab. Thank you, Shahid. Thank you, Khuldoon. And thank you to all the audience for patiently listening to us. It's very late in the evening. We should have closed the session about half an hour earlier. But for some reasons, some people were busy having their lunch, so we couldn't finish it earlier. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Asif Qureshi and the esteemed panelists for the wonderful session. And of course, this brings us to the closing of the very important first day of the Pakistan Startup Summit 2024. But we still have one more speaker who's going to be closing the day for us today. And last but not the least, we have with us Mr. Syed Asad Ali Shah, who is a fellow member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Pakistan, as well as an associate member of Institute of Cost and Management Accountants of Pakistan. Mr. Shah has also served as president of ICAP, member of SECP Policy Board, and as MD and M Managing Partner of Deloitte Yusuf Adil. He's currently serving as the chairman of B-Filer. Please welcome Mr. Syed Asad Ali Shah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, I must acknowledge and appreciate the work that SECP is doing in terms of this summit and otherwise also in promoting startups and innovation economy. I think it's really great. Not too many regulators do that, actually. So, and as Nadeem Naqvi mentioned, actually those who should be promoting the startups and the economy, he questioned where are they. So that is the dilemma in Pakistan, that those, I mean, we don't do, what we are supposed to do. Well, there's a very interesting quote on this from Oscar Wilde. He said, I'm always interested in other people's business because my own business bores me to death. So it's, I think a lot has already been said, and, coming at this time and most people want to leave, I'm not going to take much of your time, but just to highlight, I think even at the cost of repetition, that startup ecosystem is of critical importance. I think this must have been talked about already, but I must say that if you look at the world today, I mean, 25, 30 years ago, we lived in a different world. Today, we are in a different world altogether. The life that an average person is living today, even the kings and queens, 50 years ago, could not have even dreamt of, So and it's mostly the young entrepreneurs, the startups who have changed this world. And it's so unfortunate that we are not recognizing the role of startups in changing the world and making, tremendously improving the lives. And for that, I mean, if you look at the global scene, I mean, I was just looking at NVIDIA's. Today, the NVIDIA, which was a startup just 20 years ago, NVIDIA and Amazon, they were created they were listed around 97, 99. And Amazon remained in losses for 6, 7 years. But today, NVIDIA is the largest valued company. It's about $3.6 trillion today, which means its value is more than the UK's GDP, and almost close to the Indian fifth largest economy or sixth largest economy. So Apple is like that, Microsoft, these companies, if you add the 10 American companies, they will probably exceed China's economy. So that is the importance of idea economy. That is the importance of innovation economy. That is the importance of tech-enabled economy. And obviously, we had this, our last session was on capital markets. Look at our capital market. As we were talking about, hardly $40 billion, you know. So compare it where we are. And when we are talking about the startup ecosystem, I think we must also learn from the experience of some of our, other, peers and other countries. And some people say India is not comparable, but I think we must learn from India also. Again, there is another quote from Oscar Wilde. He said that I have my friends for I keep my friends for their good looks, and my acquaintances for their behavior or something like that, and I keep my enemies for their intellect, something like that. So even if their enemies have intellect, we must try to see what good things they have done. I think two countries come to my mind where the startups, and as Naqvi Saab mentioned, one is Israel. Israel and Pakistan were almost very similar countries in many ways, created around the same time, 1947, they were 1948. They have nothing in Israel, no natural resources. And both countries, these are the only two countries which were created on the basis of religion. And both the countries are surrounded by huge enemy. But look at where Israel is today. Nobody wanted to invest there because at one time they were a war country. But I think it's their startup system. There is a book on Israel. Those of you who are interested in, startup, the startup nation. Israel is called a startup nation. If you look at, on a per capita basis, the impact that the startups have made, Israel is just 9 million people, less than Lahore's population. But their GDP is $500 billion, more than $550 billion, and we are at $350 billion, 240 million people. So why is that? One factor is they started promoting startups in 90s. They started with $100 million fund. Government started it, this YASMA program. And that has totally transformed Israel. It is called a startup nation. So all the innovation centers and, all the great companies, they have some setups in Israel. And that's why Israel is so powerful, despite all this genocide and the bad things they do. But, in terms of money, in terms of wealth creation, it's a great company, great country. And similarly, people say, don't compare ourselves with India. Why not? In 1990, Pakistan's GDP was higher than India. It was also higher than China, by the way, and Bangladesh. All the three countries were behind us. Now, obviously, China is in a different league, and Bangladesh and India have also exceeded our GDP by at least 50%, and they are growing at the rate of 6 to 7%. one reason why India has picked up the momentum is we may hate Mr. Modi, but again, two things he has done for India must be acknowledged. One, when he came in 2015, he started two programs, 2015, 2016. And he leads both of them, Digital India and Startup India, both programs. Imagine how many unicorns has India produced and how important it becomes to the world. And today, India is the fastest growing economy in the world, growing at the 7%. It is in many ways now, people are looking at India more, they are more bullish on India than even China is now slowing down. They were in this manufacturing business, producing, low-value items. But when you look at this ecosystem of innovation, and that is one reason, I think, I remember when I was leading Deloitte in Pakistan as country managing partner here, I used to attend world meetings of Deloitte for 6-7 years continuously from 2009 to 2014-15. Our thought leaders in Deloitte used to say that China will become the largest economy by 2020 in terms of GDP. Almost most experts were predicting that. But you see, it didn't happen. Today, in fact, the last few years, the gap between the GDP, overall absolute terms of US and China has widened. Today, American economy is $29 trillion GDP, and China is at $18 trillion. So there's a huge gap now. And why is that so? It's because of the innovation in technology that Americans promote. It's because of the Teslas of this world and NVIDIAs of this world and Apple and Microsoft. I mean, if you look at all the top global companies, all of them are tech companies. All of them are innovation companies. So what I'm trying to say is, I think I'll not take too much of your time. It's you have already probably discussed most of the issues to the startup ecosystem. Without going into the details, I will just come to the few things that need to be done, to promote this ecosystem, to take our country to the next level, to improve our economy, to improve our growth. I think one aspect that was discussed was that Pakistan, there's no funding for startups. And I remember when I was on the policy board of SECP, probably this should not be a confidential information, there were only 6 venture capitals in Pakistan. And I saw in India there were 700 venture capital funds in India, apart from the huge amount of money that comes from abroad. And out of those 6, only one, the Laxon, I don't know whether the lady is sitting here still in the earlier panel, only Laxon had done by that time about 600 million rupees worth of investment. So imagine, India was getting about a year or so earlier, about $84 billion worth of investment out of it, half of it coming to the startup ecosystem. Whereas obviously because of Pakistan's risk, the devaluation that we have been having and other factors, political uncertainty, etc., I don't think Pakistan is going to be considered in the near future for significant investment, unless it's a very, very attractive proposition by the foreign investor. So we have to develop funding here, create funding. And for that, Israel did it from the government. India as Naqvi Saab mentioned, India created a fund of funds similar to the Israeli system. And what Israel had done was they created this 100 million, which was later on expanded. They said that whoever is going to invest in Israel, in venture capital startups, we will match whatever they are investing with the equity. And I'm talking to finance ministers, starting from Hafiz Sheikh Saab and Shaukat Tareen Saab, and and everybody has been committing that we will establish at least 100 billion. I remember when I raised it with Shaukat Tareen, he said that I'm going to set up $200 billion fund. I think Pakistan needs, we have a budget of how much? I think it's about 20 trillion rupees budget. Out of 20 trillion, we spend so much on bricks and mortars, so much on government salaries of employees who do not do much, who do not create any value. And obviously, there's a huge deficit in tens of trillions of rupees. And it's all, by the way, the other aspect that I'll touch base upon is the taxation. And I was listening to Elon Musk this morning. You may have heard, look at America. The Trump administration, they are saying it's most likely that Elon will be a cabinet member. He's being taken as minister for the Department of Efficiency. And his job will be to cut the government expenditure. And that's what is required in Pakistan. So he was saying that, one of the problem in their economy is that we have huge deficits. And the one major reason is that huge interest expense. But their interest expense, he said, was only 23%, which he thought was very, very large. 23% of their tax revenue. Our interest is about last year it was around 9 trillion. This year, it was supposed to be more, 8.5 trillion last year, but hopefully with the interest rates coming down, that's a good opportunity. So it will come down. But even if it is 8 trillion, out of 13 trillion, even if we achieve the tax collection target, it will be, 70% or so. So Elon's job, he's being selected to cut the government expenditure, reduce the government, cut the taxation, cut the regulation. And I also say, if we have to move forward in this country and innovation, do some significant innovation, we need to do 4 things. We need to cut the size of the government. We need to cut the tax rates, because one of the major impediment to all businesses, forget about these startups are also businesses, by the way. Current tax rates in Pakistan, direct tax rates are the highest in the world. Who is going to invest and then pay 50% of their profit? And now certain, if you add super tax and some other taxes at higher, those which are in higher bracket, and workers' profit participation funds and other levies, it comes to 55, 60% also. Already we have huge tax evasion in this country. In fact, most businesses, I think ये बात आप लोगों ने नहीं की, कि एक वजह जो है हमारी formal sector develop इसलिए नहीं हुआ है कि informal sector is more profitable. People make more money by evading taxes. So that's more profitable. अगर आप 18% अगर आपकी sales tax है, और अगर आपकी 1 billion rupees sales है, और उसमें आप half a billion नहीं दिखाते हैं, तो उस पर आप लगाएं ना 18%, 9 करोड़ रुपए तो आपके वैसे ही सेव हो जाते हैं. You don't have to make money. बाकी कुछ आपको innovation करने की ज़रूरत क्या है? तो The major issue, I think, is if we want to develop this startup ecosystem, we need to enhance our digitization, then the government needs to appreciate this. Government needs to, I mean, again, मुझे लोग कहते हैं कि I am a contrarian. I do a lot of criticism. But again, Churchill used to say that criticism may not be agreeable, but it is very necessary because it serves the same function as pain in a body. You know, when you have pain in the body, तो फिर आप उसको attend करते हैं. So I think it is very essential that we raise these issues with the decision makers. I really appreciate, again, the great work that SECP is doing in this area, but regulators don't do this, by the way. This is not regulators' job. This should have been the Ministry of IT's job, you know, to organize these conferences. I think it should be, the finance minister should have been here. The minister of IT should have been here. And if it was India, Prime Minister would have been here. So, पहली बात यह है कि we need commitment from the decision makers. This is they need to recognize this is very, very critical if we want to improve our economy. In fact, अभी आपकी जो change हुई है stock exchange में, फरूख सब्जवारी से मेरे messages exchange हो रहे थे. He will be, you know, taking over as CEO of Pakistan Stock Exchange. So, you know, he raised this, what should I do? I said, the greatest thing that you can do is promote startups. Because if you want stock exchange, if you want great stock exchange, you need nursery of stock exchanges, the startups, the SMEs and the entrepreneurs. So if you want to transform this country, we need to focus on startups. We need to, obviously, there are so many things. We need cultural change. We need financing, funding, which has to come from the government, and we need focus from the government. So there are a lot of other things, but I don't want to take your time. I think much has already been said. So in the end, I would really urge SECP that you continue this work, not only continue it, but enhance the momentum because no one else is doing it. और ये जो है ना कि regulators जो है ना क्योंकि बाकी दुनिया में नहीं करते तो हम भी नहीं करेंगे. It's not our job. You see, there are always people who do things for the first time, who do things differently. Our country's requirements are different. We need to, you know, do different things also accordingly. So thank you very much. Best wishes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Asad. And you're right, it's no easy task to be the last speaker, but you did it wonderfully and quoting Oscar Wilde. And of course, that is something that's essentially very important to interacting with the audience. And hats off to you for doing that. And you closed the session very appropriately because it's important, of course, when we look forward to what the next steps will be, it's important to recognize the initiative that has already been taken today. The start of the Pakistan Startup Summit and the fact that the SECP has launched this is important in itself. And as we move forward, we still have another day of great sessions tomorrow, and I hope to see you all there as well. All of those especially who stayed back till the end, you're the real ones. So it's great to have all of you in the audience today, and we look forward to meaningful dialogue turning into meaningful action as well. Thank you very much for being with us today, and I hope to see you tomorrow. Have a nice day.